There's this myth that Black people or people of African descent cannot get coronavirus. I have no idea where this notion originated from. There is nothing inherent about us as Black people, Afro Caribbean people, people of African descent, melanated people, like whatever, however we identify ourselves. There's nothing inherent about us that prevents us from getting this infection. And I know of multiple friends, acquaintances, and colleagues who are Black people who have family members who have succumbed to this infection or are critically ill as a result of it. So we are not immune.
Welcome, global citizens. Happy holidays. I am Pharaoh, and he, my co-host, is the Scribe, and I have an amazing panel today, and we have our guest, Dr. Chris Watts, who is an infectious disease specialist out of Atlanta. We should have an amazing show for you today. For our newbies who haven't been with our show before, let me first just give you a little bit of background. One, our podcast is focused on awareness and resolution. We consider we have a woke culture, but we thought that you need to stay woke. Woke is not a finite space in time. We need to continue to elevate our knowledge. So our podcast is focused on making sure not only are you aware, but you stay aware, and then finally let's find some resolutions. The other thing I want to caution or precaution you about is me. I am unapologetically unfiltered. So I may say some things that may be not necessarily PC, but this is why we have balance in our group. And I have the Scribe and the doctor and the panelist and everybody else, because I will not behave. Yeah, I will not act right. I will say things that will be contentious and spark a conversation. That's the nature of our show. So I wanted to thank you guys so much who have been rocking out with us for the whole 2020 year, which has been completely crazy, right? Pandemic 2020. We kind of followed the trend in terms of information we were sharing with the groups. We started off with Tinted, which was our first podcast, An American Fuckery, the homeless crisis, which chronicled the homeless crisis all throughout California. And then Miss Rona broke out, right? So we had the coronavirus that ended up putting the entire country and then subsequently the world on lockdown. Our second podcast was Coronavirus, Part 1 and 2, where we just talked about and described the virus. Then we had racial unrest, right? Systemic racism. We were protesting in the streets. So then our next podcast was Black Men and Endangered Species. We talked about politics, social media, finances, and climate control. And then finally, the vaccines out. So we did vaccines, Part 1, how they're manufactured, Part 2, how they're taken to clinical trials. And today I am so happy and honored to have an distinguished panel, a guest of individuals. And thank you so much, Dr. Chris Watts. I'm going to call you out a couple of times during the show because it's amazing. I know you're on the front lines doing work with patients who have the coronavirus. You're an infectious disease specialist, which I think is very clear to do so, because the idea, I think, is to have someone that actually functions in the area, not like our president, our former president, who had a radiologist speaking to infectious disease piece, right? You wouldn't go to the foot doctor if you were pregnant, right? So I think having someone specialized in an area that looks like us, that's from our area and our community, gives us an opportunity to speak intelligently, clearly, and articulately to any points. So thank you guys for rocking with us so far. So today, I think will be amazing because we're going to really dialogue about the two current vaccines that were approved by Pfizer and Moderna. So I think this will be a great discussion for all of us to go through. So let's just jump right in and get started. So I want to introduce first myself, Pharaoh. Don't nobody use my government name, please, if you know me outside. But this is my podcast. But my government job, I've worked in the industry of pharmaceutical manufacturing and development for the last 30 years with vaccines, with other different types of drugs and other biologics and medical devices. So we decided today we will approach you from two avenues. One, from the manufacturing development of drugs, and two, from after it's administered, like the healthcare from a doctor's perspective, and really to give background and insight into how that's affecting our current communities. So without further ado, I want to give Dr. Chris Watts an opportunity first to introduce himself. There are two questions as we introduce the panelists I'm going to need you guys to answer. One, who you are, where you're from, and two, are you to vaccine or not?
Hi, so I'm Chris Watts. I'm right outside of Atlanta. I've been practicing in the area for about 10 years. I did some initial research. I had a couple papers published, so I'm not unfamiliar with the research process. My role on a day-to-day basis is making sure that we provide the appropriate coverage on an inpatient setting for COVID-19 patients and other infections. As I'm sure everybody's aware, it's mostly COVID these days, so that's the major focus of me and some of my colleagues that I work in the Atlanta area with. And I'm sorry, Farrah, what was the other question, the second part?
The other question is that, are you going to take the vaccines or not?
Yes, so I have just now, as of about 15, 20 minutes ago, scheduled my vaccine that will happen this Tuesday. So I'm definitely a proponent of vaccines in general as sort of a technology, as a tool to improve overall healthcare, but I am not a one-stop shop. By no means am I 100% for every vaccine all the time in every situation. And just full honesty here, I do have a fairly healthy suspicion of a lot of institutions. So just a little bit about my background and some stuff about me. So I look forward to a spirited conversation about some of these issues.
Thank you so much, sir. Scribe, I'll let you take it over from here.
Awesome. Wow. It's enlightening to hear the doc say that he's not 100% for all the vaccines.
Don't take that and run with it. We got to start right now.
I like hearing that. So yeah, I'm just going to go around and introduce the panelists. Same as the doc guys. Say your name, where you're from, and are you to vaccine or not? You know, where do you stand in terms of all of this? So I'll go around. I'll start with you, Ms. Janet. Your name, and are you to vaccine or not?
My name is Janet Brown. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico. At this point, I do not want to vaccine.
Okay. Janet, I'm hearing you again, so maybe you have to get closer to your
no, I heard it. She said she's not for the vaccine.
Okay.
The master teacher, go ahead, brother.
I can't hear. I think he's muted.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm originally from Philly, Philadelphia, but I've been living in LA for 20 years. And regarding the vaccine, I will wait and see what's what.
Okay.
That's fair. Thank you. Dewan, brother, over to you, man. Unmute yourself, brother.
My brother.
I'm sorry, my bad. Dewan, I'm originally from Chicago, retired military, and I am not for the vaccine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dewan. Michelle, go ahead, sis.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I'm originally from LA, but I currently live in San Diego because I, too, work in biotech, and I will vaccinate when it's available to me. I'm not quite a frontliner, but when it becomes available, I definitely want to get vaccinated.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Am I missing anyone? Kev, are you there?
Yeah. Kev needs to show his video if he's going to be the panel.
Kev is with the kids, so he wants to refrain from showing the video. Kev, are you there? All right, let's skip Kev for now.
Hello?
There we go.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Hey, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? Sorry, the video's off. Got kids just running around here.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us at the panelist.
No problem. I am a proponent of the vaccines, and I plan on getting it as soon as we can. I just don't know which one, and I do worry about allergic reactions because I have a lot of allergies. But beyond that, I'm actually excited to take it. I'd be very excited to end this pandemic as soon as possible. So if it's a solution, and 70% from what I hear, if 70% of the population vaccinates, then we would have herd immunity and we could possibly go back to normal. So I'd be very excited to see that occur.
Awesome.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Go ahead, Scribe.
Go ahead, Pharaoh.
No, so Scribe, I didn't really hear you. Conveniently left yourself out of saying whether or not. I mean, nobody ain't going for that. I mean, I didn't hear you say were you the vaccine or not. We've been talking about this for months, right? The first time we had our show, our vaccine, he was like, hell no, I'm not taking this. Was in the midsummer. I don't care what's coming out. So I love that.
You just don't call me out like that.
Go ahead. Him as a millennial, me as an Xer, there's a difference in how we approach things, but he was definitely a hell no. Where are we at with that now?
So I will say this, when the pandemic first broke out, like everybody else in my generation, we were freaked out, right? Because a lot of us have never experienced anything like this in our lifetime. So this was scary, and there were a lot of, conspiracies that were just going around, and we were, very skeptical. But, the Pharaoh and I've been doing this for, a couple of months, and I've done a lot of research, and I will say that I'm still not 100%, but like Kevin said, if we hit 70% and we can get back to some sense of normalcy, I think for us, it's more about getting our lives back. We want to go out, we want to go to the clubs, we want to go eat out with our friends, so that's, very important to us. So with that said, I will say that when the vaccine is available to us, I'm definitely going to take it.
Okay. That's a definitely change. So I want to argue before we get started with the panelists to give their individual, questions. I had a chance to Zoom bomb the CDC yesterday on Friday, and I actually stole some information. Well, maybe they shared it. But I took some of their slides. I put some information together, and I think this is hot off the press. And each participant, what I will do is send these slides to you if you want to request those to have them in your, for reference later on. But the reason why I want to make this point is to speak to the advancements in our technology. One, I want to speak to safety, efficacy, and then I think an issue is at what speed that these current vaccines were made is a general question, whether or not that still speaks to safety or not. So having the chance to sit in with the Center for Disease and Control yesterday on Friday, I sat in for a whole hour. I listened to them speak about both drugs, Pfizer and Moderna. They were speaking to clinicians who were going to administer the drugs. They were going through the entire process. I stole the slides. I made them for us today. And I wanted to take a minute to go over these slides with you guys. And then let's get into heated, spicy conversation. Yes? Round of applause.
Let's go.
Round of. Thank you very much. All right. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to get to it. Okay. So the first thing I want to say to everyone, right, is to educate, then vaccinate. Education doesn't mean getting these, and this is the jab, definitely a jab at the millennials. Don't get it from IG. Don't get it from Twitter, right? Those are conspiracy theories that need to be grounded in some level of truth itself, right? The mRNA vaccines that are both released are Pfizer and Moderna's way, or the new technology that they've actually used. So I want to speak to the safety, the efficacy, and speed at which some of these are made, and which I really love about science is that as it evolves, it also has an opportunity for us to be more safe, more effective on how we utilize these drugs currently going in the future. So one of the things I want to say that vaccines are preventative and they're not cures. So the idea earlier on in the year was for, and I'm taking another jab at millennials, is for, and anyone else, you can see I'm a little on edge about people not wearing their masks, social distancing, and using good hygiene. Because the idea was that if we did that for the first 9 or 10 months, when the
are you sharing your screen yet?
Am I not?
No, you're not.
I'm sorry, guys. I thought I was.
No, you're not. Yeah.
Okay. Let me then stop hollering and and see if I can get back to sharing my screen. Let's see. What about now? Can you guys see my screen or no?
Nope.
I can't see it.
So you know what I think I did?
What did you do?
Let me stop sharing for a minute. Let me try this again. What about now? What about now? No?
Nope.
You're sharing your computer sound.
Okay. You know this is operator error, right? Let me do this one more time. What about now? No?
Yeah, I don't see it.
No. Should be a green button at the bottom that says share screen.
I do. Okay, let me click off of this. What about, folks? What about now, folks?
There we go. It's starting.
Did I get it?
Hold on. There we go.
You see it? Okay, back to screen.
Yes.
Okay, back to screen. All right. So the idea again, guys, is to educate, then vaccinate, right? To always, I'm a 100% component of vaccination, but I'm also more importantly focused on people educating themselves about what you're doing, what you're injecting yourself with. And are you going to the doctor? And do you understand your body before you get vaccinated? So the idea is to educate and vaccinate. So mRNA vaccines are a new technology designed to, I think, to build more safe and effective vaccines. So again, one of the major points I want to say that vaccines are preventative and not cures. So the idea, I believe, in developing these vaccines was to initially have everyone for the first, months of the year when it broke out to wear your mask, social distance, and have great hygiene, which I don't feel many of us, all of us were doing collectively. So the virus spread indiscriminately amongst us. And we have now close to 3,000 deaths per day and over 316,000 people that have died. In the 1918 pandemic, we had 675,000 Americans that died, 50 million died worldwide, 500 million infected. So viruses are serious. The second thing I want to discount is that if that material that's used to make vaccines come from any other source, not 5G chips, not any other material, messenger RNA, ribonucleic acid is present in all living organisms, but its principal role and the reason why we choose this technology is to carry messages or signals to develop proteins. The two conventional ways, and this is important, initially we grew vaccines in cells, chicken eggs, mammalian cells, but the idea is to initially identify the virus. So once we were able to isolate the coronavirus and understand its morphology, or what we call its shape and how it looks like, we were able to understand that this particular coronavirus had a spike on it, a spike protein, which is really unique to that in itself. So once we understand we have the actual virus, there's two ways we can make vaccines, two ways now, more conventional ways. We can grow them in cells, or we can take the genetic material and force your body to build an immunity against that. So some of the questions I think I want you guys either to pose to Chris, Dr. Watts later on, is in regards to weakened pathogens, meaning that we have to take the virus itself, we weaken it, meaning that we deactivate it so that it does not cause the virus, or it's completely inactivated, or we take a part of it. But the reason we would leave any part of it weakened or portion of it that we need is because your body needs to elicit an immune response. The whole purpose of introducing vaccines into your body is to force your body to develop an immunity just in case you get infected. The two technologies now to grow them in cells are either to take the genetic material, which is taking this yellow piece here, the antigen, which is the piece in the virus that actually causes the infection and disease. We take that component of it, which also codes for making that particular protein, and we connect it to the RNA virus, RNA vaccine, or the RNA molecular material. That material, once we attach that to the messenger RNA, and this is where I want to share with the general audience that the two means of creating vaccines, I think, speak to whether they're safe or not. Now, not to say that the traditional way of making vaccines weren't safe, but what that forces us to do in manufacturing is to make sure we had definitive ways to purify it as not to allow infectious elements, as you see here on the right, or allergens from the egg cultures to go into the actual vaccine. This particular messenger RNA doesn't use the cells to grow. This particular piece of it allows it to replicate quickly, fast, and without having all the other elements that naturally occur when we grow vaccines in eggs. The new RNA vaccines, the new way of doing it is to take what naturally occurs in your body, that's the blue line, and then to take a piece of the actual coronavirus, which is the yellow line. That antigen, or what causes your body to have a response, now that we've connected it and it's coded with information on how to make the protein of the virus, of the coronavirus, unactivated. And it's really important to say that when we do this genetic, in a sense, manipulation, that we inactivate the actual portion of it so it doesn't cause the disease, but it causes an immune response. You guys can challenge Dr. Watts on that also. So the methodology, the reason why I think it's an advantage in the two new vaccines that were made now through Pfizer and Moderna, they both now use this RNA mechanism. They don't grow it in cells. They actually take the actual DNA itself and it replicates a lot quicker. So you get a lot more of the actual vaccine in a quicker amount of time. This is why I want to speak to people about speed. There were no shortcuts cut in developing these current vaccines. The traditional way would take a lot longer to grow the cells, to purify it and get the vaccine. That's why it generally takes so long. These new methods allow you to take and perform the same function of an immune response, but allows you to grow the material quicker. So it's easier, it's safer to produce, it's less contaminant, it's low risk to DNA, meaning some people were questioning whether or not this RNA would integrate into your DNA. Well, that RNA doesn't even see the area where your DNA is located in your cells. It's dissolved in the cytoplasm way before it gets to the nucleus where your DNA is contained. No risk of it changing or altering your DNA. It's a rapid response to current pandemics, meaning that we can grow it pretty fast. It's lower cost. And one of the key things about viruses is that they mutate quickly. This is the reason why you need the flu shot every year, because viruses mutate. And as they mutate, the one you had earlier is no longer effective. Once we've now made this new messenger RNA that has this spike protein on it, that is inactivated, that does not cause the disease, now you're at the point of receiving your injections. The injections provide direct immunity once you have injected yourself with the actual messenger RNA. It encodes itself through the natural biological process. It goes into your cells. Your cells then recognize that, one, we have a foreign invader. So the spike protein is the orange piece that appears here on your cell. The B cell, the CD4 T cell, the CD8 cell, that is your army. That is everybody's immune army. And when anything enters your body that is detrimental to it, the body then sends the B cell first to recognize what it is, make antibodies to it, and the CD4 and the CD8 cells, they're killers. They kill the rest. That's your immune system. So getting the vaccine allows you then to build an immune system that, just in case you're infected with the virus later on, you already now, one, recognize what it looks like and have the troops to kill it. These then, after a while, and you can talk to Dr. Watts about how long the immunity lasts, but once you have the spike protein encoded with the messenger RNA in your body, you develop at the top right neutralizing antibodies. These are part of your troops or your troops or the people, or not the people, actually your defense system in your system that protects you just in case you're infected. And then you have the cell mediated immunity, which recognizes anything that comes in that looks similar to the actual virus itself and is prepared to neutralize it, kill it, and dispense it from the body. These two vaccines that were approved this Friday, I have acquired both of the ingredients that are existing in both of them. Sorry about that, guys. So these ingredients in both, all this information was available from the CDC website. I was able to actually go and do Google, get the information out. So for those that are concerned about the ingredients in, these are the discussions that you should have with your doctor about the ingredients in the vaccine, if you have any allergies to it and things of that sort. So this, guys, is my argument, at least for why the current process or technology used to make the new vaccines. Now, there are other vaccines coming down the line from other companies that don't use this technology. It doesn't mean they're not as safe, but I personally believe in the mRNA. So that's it. I know that was a lot, so hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pharaoh.
That was a great summary.
I'm going to also send everyone these slides so that you can have that if you want to refer back to. But I think the key thing is that this information was just released Friday, and it gives you the active ingredients in both of the current vaccines. So I think the conversation should be had with doctors like Dr. Watt about taking the vaccine prior to. So that's my plug before we get started with the questions. So let's jump right in, panelists, and see what you got.
Thank you. And thank you for everybody for sending in their questions in the chat room. We'll get to those later. But yeah, we're going to open it up to the panelists. This is your shot, guys. Let us know if you have any questions. The floor is yours.
So anyone can start. Don't make me choose you, right? Any one of the three questions. One of the panelists, go ahead.
Pharaoh, maybe I can, while we get the questions together, would it be helpful for me to just maybe summarize the issue with regard to the disparities in the Black community, or should we wait?
I think that's going to come up in the questions, though.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm going to pick Michelle to go first, since you guys are being shared. So Michelle, share one of your questions as a panel.
Okay, I guess I can go first. My first question is, so I know the vaccine is more like when they did the studies, it was for 16 and over and 18 and over. So I was wondering, in the future, do you think there will be a vaccine available for pediatric patients?
Yes, ma'am. So, as you mentioned, the initial emergency authorization approval, which was sort of that FDA process, was limited to for the Pfizer vaccine 16 and older, and for the Moderna vaccine 18 and over. But I was fortunate enough to take a peek at some of the original data from the for the Pfizer vaccine, and they actually had significant data much younger than 12 years old. But they could not, or they were hesitant. I guess they could have. The hesitation in presenting that data for emergency authorization approval was in acknowledging the concern and the apprehension that America as a whole has in this new vaccine, this questionable quote unquote new technology. As such, the decision was made by the company and by some of the officials in the FDA to not present the data for the younger patient population because the risk of not being powered enough. So, in other words, for anybody who's, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but some folks may not be familiar with how physicians or how researchers are able to make conclusions. So, one of the ways that I can make a conclusion X plus Y equals Z is because statistically speaking, there's enough data to be able to make that conclusion. And with the younger population, younger than 16, for that specific virus, for the Pfizer vaccine, they didn't have enough. Participation in order to meet that criteria. So they decided to just wait until they can get more data to approve it. But a long way around saying that yes, the plan is to vaccinate everybody, from little kids to older folks, and some of that data is available. Now, for the Moderna vaccine, they had some as well, but it wasn't quite as much, even with the Pfizer vaccine. So it was a similar decision, but they didn't have quite as much younger data that I was able to see. But the Pfizer definitely had data, and the efficacy and the safety profile was very similar to that for the adults. So I do believe it'll be soon.
Okay.
Yeah, Michelle, also part of the phase 3 trials I heard from the clinicians yesterday was that the continuing piece of it, just because they released the vaccine, guys, I want to let you know that the trials continue to go on. Mm-hmm. Right, so the phase 3 trials are still continuing, and then they started to add other elements to that, which one was the pediatric piece. So they mentioned that part of starting or continuing the trials for each was to take it to the other level. So that's a great question. Mm-hmm. The master teacher, you're next.
But they're definitely going to get to the kids, though. That's a patient population that's at risk. So,
unmute yourself,
sir. Brother.
Unmute yourself, sir. There you go.
How can you trust any of the information that is given when money is at the root of the motive to create the vaccine?
A fantastic question. To answer your question is I don't at all. I don't trust the information until I can verify it. I don't trust the information no more than I would trust Fox News or CNN because of the history of not providing.
All news sources for that.
Yes, right. That's right. All news sources. And so the issue with me is verifiability, reproducibility, and then I also look at what their motives are, right? So, for example, if I want to go and I want to get a bungee cord, right? So I'm going to get a bungee cord. This is something important to me. I'm an avid bungee cord participant, and I want to get a bungee cord. I'm going to get a bungee cord from somewhere reputable, first of all. I'm going to ask a couple of my buddies, say, hey, man, have y'all ever used this bungee cord? Because I'm about to jump off this this tower. I want to make sure this bungee cord going to work. And then I maybe see somebody jump off with that bungee cord. And then what happens is I look at that company's motivation. So if that company's in the business of making bungee cords, then that company doesn't want to make a bungee cord that's not going to work, because otherwise they're only going to sell one bungee cord. And that's the same situation with Pfizer and with Moderna and some of the other guys. They have a huge motive to make sure that, one, the vaccine is safe, and two, the vaccine is effective. An ideal profit model would be if the vaccine was required every single year. If they could say, okay, well, I'm going to get a vaccine, and that vaccine is only going to work for a year because of the virus or because of whatever external circumstances, and that vaccine is going to be safe. So I don't necessarily trust, from a big picture standpoint, the companies, but I trust their profit motive. I trust that they want to sell me the vaccine. I trust that they want to sell it to the company. That's the first thing. The second thing is I'm able to look at some of the data and pick out any major issues that could have in the past led to difficulties, led to question marks whether something was associated with the vaccine. And then I'm able to, and then I was fortunate enough in this particular situation, not in all healthcare, but with this particular situation, to be in contact with some of the providers. I was myself, my health system was involved in the Moderna vaccine. We were not involved with the Pfizer vaccine. So I know some of the investigators. I trained with some of the folks at Mass General, which was another site that they were participating in it. I'm familiar with the guy that designed or developed the technology for these two vaccines. So there was some history as far as me understanding that something was coming, some history firsthand. Some of the people that I know personally sort of co-signed what was happening, as well as understanding their profit motive. And then understanding the technology and then looking at the data. It would be very rare for them to try and hide something in the data, but I don't question whether that's a possibility. I think really your question was looking at all this, seeing what you see, how do you know that something's not in the background? And the answer to that question is this: you don't know that there's not something in the background. That's just not something that you can, unless you were the one designing the whole, process for the vaccine and bringing it to the market. But what you can do is you can take every step to try to determine if there was a history of this specific technology, a history of the specific scientists that developed the technology for this specific vaccine. And then you can also look at what has happened to people who've been getting it. So 37,000 people, over 30,000 people received the vaccine. And at 4 to 6, 8 weeks out, there were no untoward effects associated. Now, there were some, and maybe we'll get into some of the specifics of what happened before. But we have that, right? Then we look at other countries. We have, thousands of people that have been vaccinated in the UK, for example, and in other places in Europe. So we have a little bit of that experience. And then we can even look back at previous vaccines. So there were several trials with the mRNA technology in 2017. And we look, okay, well, why did those trials end? What happened with those trials? And it turns out that there were no major untoward effects. And then we say, okay, well, the people that developed the technology, what do they have? What are their concerns? We look at that too. And so to answer your question kind of a long way around, we look at all those different factors and try to make an informed decision, always understanding that you could still be in a situation where you miss something. But to do as much due diligence as you can, I think is everybody's task. And then once you do that from people that you trust, I personally feel like it's something that I'm ready to pull the trigger on. All the time, at the same time, understanding that there may be a possibility for some untoward side effects that were not considered and didn't have time to get that stuff figured out. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Chris, let me ask you this though. Speak to the process itself. I think I can't speak necessarily to people's individual motives, right? Because people don't have that. But all the time. But what I'm asking about is the process itself. So like peer review, right? Independent advisory boards, right? That are segregated from the actual companies that are developing the vaccines itself, those that are approving the vaccines itself. That kind of structure itself can be considered governmental control. So I think we're talking to that piece and how that influences or doesn't influence science, or the distinction between the two.
Yes. So absolutely. So there are checks and balances in the healthcare community, in the research community, that are designed to make sure there are impartial observers, impartial evaluations at several different levels. Okay. So before a person can even, I'm sure most of you may know this, but before you can even start the process to doing research in a given institution, you have to go through a board to get it figured out whether it's ethical, not unethical, whether there's a need for it. And every step before you bring it to market, there are those types of checks and balances. So there's no doubt that there are checks and balances the whole time, and it is oftentimes a situation where the person who is benefiting from advancing that research is completely separate from the person who is evaluating it at multiple steps. But I think the brother was speaking to the idea that sometimes, even though those checks and balances can be there, things can fall through the cracks. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't appreciate that position, because that's a position that we have been found to be all too true on multiple times. And so we have to vet that. So we want to use the utility of that, of the vetting process for the scientific research. You also want to know somebody that you trust, and say, hey, is this something that you've looked at? Somebody that knows this stuff, research. I have looked at it myself, and I know researchers who have. I know people who were involved personally. I'm able to look at it myself, the data, and sometimes they try to hide stuff in the data, and it looks fantastic. What I can say to you is the people that did this research for the Pfizer and the Moderna as well, but more so for the Pfizer, those people did the research, designed the study with the mindset that nobody's going to want to take this. And I have to go overboard with what I'm doing as far as the amount of people I have, and part of how we power the study, as far as, the side effects, what we're doing here. So what they did was higher than the average efforts in bringing something like this to market, directly a result, in my opinion, of people's concern about these types of things with trust. But Brother Farrow is right. It's definitely a lot of checks and balances, but it's a combination of things. Okay.
Well, well, one of the things that I see in it is that the financial windfall can be so large. For instance, my Moderna stock, it quintupled since.
Right, it did. It's about 140, 150 today. Yeah, or on Friday.
Not that you were checking.
Not that I was saying. I don't have Moderna stock.
I have stock in it too. I mean, I checked, but it's.
I don't. I didn't do Moderna. I did a little Pfizer. But I didn't do a little Pfizer, but I was going to, but I chickened out. But go ahead.
But the financial windfall will be so large for the company who really is able to be the mainstay or the base company that is pumping out the vaccine. That
absolutely
the consequences of it, they won't even face those lawyers will come in and they will settle all of those accounts, or anybody who had anything, and it won't even be a pin dot in the amount of money that they make. And if the vaccine is something that has to be taken every year, they've essentially just created water again, because now everybody has to come and drink from it and it's just the financial windfall is just too much for them not to just for example, I
get what you're saying.
I have a very close family member who works for Merck, right? Okay, and so these companies, they have these independent panels or agencies that are supposed to be watching over them, but it always seems like everybody is on the take in all of these places. Right. If you really boil it down, everybody is really they're all getting their cheese, their cake from the same place. You know what I mean? And so,
I don't know, Master Teacher. I disagree, because you do have. I mean, I think that's the conspiracy theory going around. I'm not discounting that they don't make money from it, but I don't know if that necessarily equates to bad science. I don't necessarily, because I want to make money, and I think the distinction that we make sometimes, and part of it is our era, because we think if we're driven by the money, the science doesn't necessarily equate to be good. Right. And I can't necessarily agree with that, because on the level of scientists that actually make the drug, I might not be benefiting anywhere from the millions of dollars that it made, but my commitment to science is that in itself, though. But let's get another question and we'll get back to you.
Can I just address a little bit of that? I'm sorry.
We want to go to Ebony.
So, because that's just really, really important. That's really, really important. And I understand what you're saying. And I am also of the perspective that they do a cost benefit. That's what you're talking about, right? So a couple of things. One of the things is that when the government did their initial funding for these vaccines, it was 5. And one of the reasons it was 5, so that we could kind of avoid one company, not me, right? It's not me, I'm not. But so that the idea was that from the medical community, that was that so we can avoid any particular one getting a windfall. And secondly, so that we can make sure that we have enough, vaccine. But there is nothing that will be able to put the concerns to rest when you say, okay, well, would they not just care about it and just go on and give it to us and say, hey, we'll take care of that on the backside with lawyers? That is a possibility, and there's nothing really you can say that's going to put those concerns to rest, outside of just understanding that it is better for them to make a vaccine that works than one that doesn't work. And so I have a distrust.
To be very clear, though, Dr. Watts, is that I believe that Pfizer was not funded by the government to develop their drug, and I don't think neither was.
No. When I say funding, I'm not talking about development.
They were funded to do distribution of the drug after it was made.
That's right.
One of the companies I'm actually working for to do development on the vaccine was funded. They had no money. Yeah. They had no product on the market right now, so they've taken everything from there. But their drug is also months behind the development of the larger players like Moderna and Pfizer. Right. So they didn't take any governmental money to develop their vaccine. Now, other companies did. I'm just making a distinction.
Right. But they did allocate some for the for distribution.
They did for distribution, right? Once after it's made. So the incentive of that is to get it out to the general public. They bought it after I make it to make sure I can get it to our people. But the incentive to develop it didn't come from our government, at least for these two.
Oh, right. That's correct. For none of the five, it did not. None of those came from the government, not the institute.
I just want to make sure that point is to segregate that two pieces. But let's get to Ebony real quick, another one of the panelists. I'm going to come back to you, Master Teacher. I promise. I'm not going to lose that point, man. I promise. I just need to make sure I get to the other panelists. Ebony, you want to share one of your questions with us, please? I can't.
We can't hear you, Ebony.
I still can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Mute now. There you go. No, we can't hear you.
You want to type it into the chat?
Let's go over to Duan. Duan, do you have a question?
Okay, Duan, you're up, man.
Well, one of the questions I have that makes me skeptical about vaccines is that per law, people who are doing the vaccinations can't be sued if something goes wrong. And the reason why that makes me skeptical is because if you have something and you're so sure about it as far as responsibility, then I don't understand why the person can't be sued if it doesn't go well or if things doesn't work out right. But yet you want to try and make it to where everyone needs to have a vaccination. And history-wise, America is not trustworthy in anything vaccination-wise because of me being an African-American man and knowing the history of things that have happened to our people, and then just America, period, and what the things to do. I mean, being in the military, I've been pumped with so much stuff.
Yes,
and I'm like, was this stuff really, was it really this? Was it something else? So it makes me skeptical.
Yeah, no, I get it, and that skepticism is probably healthy. What I would say to you is that, I will by no means try to make any excuses for what has happened in the medical community and at large with regard to, us and other minorities, because it's been ridiculous and it's true. The reality, though, is that there have been some diseases that were completely eradicated based on vaccination. So the reason that we don't have polio right now is because of vaccinations. So the history of vaccinations, specifically carved out of some of the other issues, has been fantastic throughout the last 200 years. So vaccinations as a whole were used in indigenous societies. A type of vaccination is called inoculation, which is all we're doing, has always been used. So it's a technology that's been known. Vaccinations as a whole in the United States have been decent. There have been certain things that have come up with regard to vaccinations, but if you look at them as whole, that hadn't been one of the issues that has been major as far as causing harm to our community. In fact, they have helped. So if you look at them on balance, they've helped quite a bit. The question, though, is, what is with this legislation? And what has happened in this pandemic is consistent with what happened in just about every pandemic known to man. what happens in this pandemic is officials for government say, okay, look, what we need to do is we need to move this ball along. We need to address this as quickly as possible. Medical community and research community come to the officials and say, look, we cannot push these things any faster because if we do, something might happen and then we'll get sued. So as a result, not just this year, but every single pandemic or epidemic pandemic that has been, whenever investigational therapies come up, these types of legislations are passed. And this legislation doesn't say flat out you can't sue anybody. What it does is it reduces the validity of some of those lawsuits. But a lawyer can sue you. Nobody can you can't sign your right to sue somebody away, and so you can always sue. Now, what those do is they provide some protections. I'll give you an example. So there's a medicine called remdesivir that you may be familiar with that 99% of all patients that come into the hospital with reduced oxygen, with shortness of breath, are going to receive. Now, that medicine, when it first came to market, I couldn't give that medicine to people. So I would sit in an ICU. A patient has COVID. Literally, this is a story that happened to me every day. And the patient would be not able to breathe. The patient would be suffering. And I had no options. I had no recourse to try to make the situation better. What I walked into work that day was with an idea that, hey, I'm going to try to make a difference, make something better. And here's somebody sitting next to me who can't get better. There's nothing I can do. Well, I have this medicine, remdesivir, but it hadn't been completely studied. There's a bunch of studies, but it hadn't been completely. So as a result of that law, I now have access to that medicine. Now, what does that do? Two things. One is it helps that patient. Doesn't help them immensely, but it helps them better than what we had before. The second thing that does is it gives me another toolbox, and it also tries to help me figure out whether or not that was appropriate or not. So in other words, now I realize it was a good idea. But what if there were some issues associated with that? Okay, me as a clinician looking at that patient suffering, should I have the ability to say, okay, well, I'm going to give this to you as long as you sign your consent and you're aware of what's going on, obviously? Or am I going to keep this away from you because I'm afraid you may sue me for giving you something and then you have a problem later on? That's always going to be a balance. That has always been the case with every epidemic. So that legislation is nothing unique about it. There's nothing new, and it is consistent across the industrialized world. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about
address for me the risk reward issue, because I feel people think that medicines should absolutely work perfect for everyone in the same exact way. What is the risk reward that we measure when we're giving or administering any medication for any kind of indication?
Right. So what we hope to do, we hope to do more good than bad, is a way to put it. But the basic idea is if there is a treatment modality that is effective in reducing whatever the symptomatology is, and that treatment modality does not have significant untoward side effects, specifically causing kidneys to fail, causing liver to fail, and causing cardiovascular issues, major cardiovascular issues, then that modality is considered. If that modality is FDA approved, I don't have to ask the patient. If it's not, I have to ask the patient. But even if I ask the patient and you don't help me with some of those legal issues, it can still be an issue. And these companies are benefiting from that same type of legislation. But to Brother Farrell's point, there is nothing I can give you. There's nothing that I can prescribe that does not have some type of side effects. We now know that people who got glucocorticoids or steroids for joint issues, we all probably played a little ball. You get a little steroid injection, get some in the arm. You get them long enough, sometimes that can lead to bone density problems. Now, we're going to go back and sue the people in 1990s that gave me steroids because my bone density is not what it should be. Maybe you should have the right to recourse for sure, but some type of protections in a situation where there is a bit of an emergency to develop these modalities has been the case for a while. I don't know how I feel about that. I tend to be on the medical side with that as far as some protections are important, but I can understand how that would be a source of concern. But there's nothing new about that.
In a sense, right? You would have to know what's going to happen in the long run, right? Or test exhaustively into you, for instance, the vaccine. I think we can make the vaccines to give people more assurance safer if we waited another 4 to 6 months. But if we wait another 4 to 6 months, you're going to have hundreds of thousands more deaths. That's the balance we're at now. I mean, before the pandemic.
Yeah, so that's kind of. Let me just make one point about that. I know you probably got some other people wanted to get. So the issue of safety. This type of technology, as Brother Farrell fantastically pointed out in the opening, is basically instead of putting a stick into your body, I'm causing your body to make the stick. Okay, and so by doing that, in sort of an ideal perspective, it is much safer because the protein is not foreign. The protein is yours. Your body created the protein. So the technology, the idea is incredibly promising as far as a revolution in medicine, possibly for cancer treatment and a lot of other things. So the safety, I think, is good. You may not know much. So the only downside, the only concerns that people talk about is maybe very long term. You're not going to have the information about safety in 6 months. Not the real information you want. You're just not going to have that. And so I think with the data we have, it is very good. I'm not here to tell you there's zero risk, because that'd be a lie, and I'm not going to lie. But it is a relatively safe modality as far as what we know. And I know that's not reassuring to a lot of people, but that's the truth.
Thank you, Doc. Let's go over to some of the people here have their hands up. Janet, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, I understand that it takes a long while for the FDA to approve medications, vaccines, whatever. And with this pandemic going on, it seems like this was approved very quickly. I mean, how do they make those determinations between medications?
Yes, ma'am. So I appreciate that question, Janet. That's a fantastic question. And that's one of the biggest concerns. How is this happening so quick, right? So two things. So development and then process, right? So one, how did we develop this so fast? And two, how did we get it to approval so fast, right? Is that right, Janet? So the first,
Yes.
to answer your first question, how we got this so much faster. So what happens is, if you use that stick analogy, right? So your body's creating the stick now. But if I have to go and create the stick, then I have to grow the tree, right? So I have to go grow my tree. I have to get a plant. I have to, watch out for anything that might happen in that process, and that takes some years. You're bypassing all of those years of development by using a technology that sort of takes your body and uses your body to create the same thing that would have taken me many, many years, sometimes 8 years to create. So as far as research, that's how we were able to, not we, because obviously I didn't do any of this, but that's how the vaccine was able to be developed so quickly.
Don't try to make disclaimers, man. If you got to own somebody, you're a medical doctor in the field. Well, blame everything on you. No.
I have some concerns too. I think I'm over here with the master teacher, to be honest with you.
We're trying to get out. But I'm hoping. So we give you the business, of course.
Right.
Don't get away with that easy, guys. Come on, right? But I agree. That piece of it, that development piece, the technology, is what I connect with.
Right. And so if you're talking about the second piece of the approval piece, so understand what happened. It's an emergency use authorization. So that means that there was some crisis, like if you have 9/11, okay, that we need to be quicker in mounting a response for. And so that's what happened. So this is a situation where our government said, look, this is an emergency. We need to expedite this process for approval. And essentially, you're not talking about speeding up the nuts and bolts of the science. You're talking about speeding up the red tape, the meetings, the send it to this office, to send it to that office. So that's essentially what was sped up. And also remember, this is emergency use authorization. So they're still going to go through the normal FDA process. Okay, so you're still going to get that kind of vetting, even though you didn't have any decrease in the amount of vetting you had with the FDA. So to answer your question, Janet, it was a different technology, so it's quicker to bring to market. And two, the FDA was a government decision to get out some of the red tape in order to really look at the data. And just as an aside, they looked at it on the 10th and then the 17th. It was a session between, I think it was 6 in the morning to 9, where they vetted all this stuff on national TV. Every single bit of data was discussed. So everyone had an opportunity to look at that, and so I hope I answered that question for you, Janet.
Let's go to Ebony. Can we go back to Ebony real quick? I'm sorry, Janet, did you have something else to say? I don't want to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say this as a side note. I mean, it's almost like we're getting...
Breaking up a little bit. Do me a favor, Janet, and type your question in the chat room, and I'll get back to that one. But I want to give Ebony opportunity to go back. Ebony, are you still there? Are you still with us? I don't know why we can't hear you, Ma.
We have an issue with Ebony's sound, so maybe type your question in, Ebony. But we have a couple of participants who have their hands raised, so I want to get to them too. Steve J.
Before we do that, though, we got to go to the panelists, though. We got to give the panelists the opportunity to give their questions, and we'll get to. I promise we'll get to the other pieces, but we asked them on for a reason. So, Kevin, do you want to give your you want to unmute and maybe ask your question?
Kevin?
If not, then we can. Ebony, I don't know why we can't hear you. We still can't hear you, Ebony.
Yeah, no, we can't.
Then, okay, let's go back and take a question then from the group, and then we'll come back to the panelists.
There we go. We have a couple of questions also in the chat, so I think Ebony's like changing computers. But in the meantime, Steve, do you want to go ahead and ask a question? There we go.
Unmute, Steve.
I don't think we can hear you, Steve.
Gotta unmute. I'll tell you what, let's get to the first question that was written, though. So Miriam wrote a question and says, good afternoon. First, I would like to say thank you for allowing me to participate and listen into this very important conversation. I'm a nurse and I come from a large family of nurses. I'd like to know if Dr. Watts has a preference to which vaccine he would recommend getting and giving.
Yes, thank you for that, Miriam, and thank you for your. I'm sure it's very tough work these days. So yes, ma'am. I do not have a preference, and the reason being is because both of them have shown similar efficacies. I would not have any qualms about taking either one of them. They have their advantages. Moderna obviously doesn't have to be kept as cold as the Pfizer, but both of them have similar efficacies, similar side effect panels, and so I would be completely comfortable with the clinical immunity that would be associated with either one of those vaccines. So I can't say one over another, to be honest, because I think they're about the same. The technology is the same. It's the same spike protein. It's just one company versus another company. And one of the other ones, I think, is an mRNA virus, too. So I don't have a preference over them, and I think both of them will provide appropriate clinical responses.
Steve.
Yeah, just real quick. When I went to unmute myself, it said the host has you muted. It will not allow you to unmute unless you guys do it. So anyway, thank you for allowing me to ask my question. Great discussion. So I have an Air Force background, and when I think of like the FAA and the FDA, I guess my question, Doctor, would be: can you speak to the fact that a lot of the FDA executives, people that sign off, is it true that they are not from the medical companies? So it's kind of like the wolf guarding the sheep.
Yeah.
What do you call it? The chicken hen. So you have the same people actually signing off who actually work. A lot of them work for those companies and become FDA executives. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah. So I'll speak in broad terms because the actual approval of this was by a board, and so. In broad terms, and I think the issues you're bringing to light is an accurate one, whether you're talking about politics, you're talking about medicine, you're talking about academics, it seems to be one pond, right? It seems to be, well, I worked for Merck for 10 years and I was the CFO and now I'm going to go work for the government, or vice versa. What the government officials will tell you when you ask them those questions is, we want the best and we want the brightest, we want the people that know about these issues. That's why we hire them. What seems to be the case to me is they want it to be a continued tight network of guys, a good old boys club, if you will, at every level, which doesn't give a lot of people a lot of comfort. And so as sort of a general rule, there are some FDA officials that were previously employed by the industry. I haven't looked at the statistics in about a year because this comes up quite a bit, but I don't think it was a significant amount the last time I looked at it. But what is going to be no doubt, there will be people with ties in this industry from the private as related to or with some type of ties to the people that do the approval process. That's just sort of also a byproduct of the industry. So if you look at the Air Force and you look at the people that did some, let's say some specific, very specific type of Air Force activity, I don't know, maybe a specific warhead that was being evaluated, then it's a specific amount of people doing that. Some are military, some are private, but they all have an expertise in that given field. And you would say, well, if I'm on the military side, I wouldn't necessarily want somebody who knows nothing about this to be talking to me about it on the private side. I'm going to want somebody that knows what they're talking about. So it's a balance that has to be struck, right? So it's understand that these people are the experts in the field, and at the same time trying to limit their potential conflicts of interest. And so I understand your point, and I share your concern with that. I don't believe that would have been a major factor with this vaccine. But I don't want to try to speak to the exact amount of FDA officials that were previously. But I know it happens, and I'm sure it's happening right now.
Let's take a question from Havana Kid. He says, "Do you think that Vice President Pence really took the vaccine, or was it fake, or I'm assuming placebo?"
Yeah.
And
yeah.
What is the planned pandemic by the government?
Was this a planned pandemic?
So there's two questions. Do you think Vice President Pence really took the vaccine, or was it fake? And was this a planned pandemic by the government?
Right. I don't know what anybody's political ideology is, but I just have to be completely honest with you. My opinion on, yes, sir. My opinion on Vice President Pence and President Trump is not extremely high with regard to their intellectual capacity to both do harm and to do good. Okay, I don't believe that. I think they're both incompetent. Is probably the way that I would describe it. And as such, I believe that Mike Pence believes that the pandemic is real, and I believe that Mike Pence believes that taking the vaccine would at least mitigate his risk of getting things because he knows he takes a lot of risks. So if I were a betting man, I would say he probably did take it. Okay, if I was a conspiracy theorist, which I have some leanings towards that direction, I would also say that Mike Pence would not be one of the decision makers. Okay, so if there's a conspiracy, nobody's going to get Mike Pence to lead their conspiracy, right? Okay, you're talking about a guy that's not too sharp, so I don't think that he would be the person that would be aware.
How do you feel about Mr. Pence? You said I didn't really get that indication.
Hey, he came for him.
That to me sound like a jab. Like, I'm not mad though.
But that was a real jab, though.
Right? That's the one that had the fly landing. I mean. So.
Yes, that's it. But to your point, whether it was a planned pandemic, I actually had the opportunity during the initial phases of the pandemic to have discussions with the Wuhan physicians that were on the forefront of the disease. We had there were meetings over about a week with them, with translators, and strangely enough, most of them speak English. But we were able to fully access them. So what I am aware of, and what I do believe very strongly, is that every year there are influenzas and respiratory viruses that come from the east to the west, and it's sort of a global thing. It's kind of like climate. It happens every single year, and you can predict things based on that. So it would not be anything that would have to be nefarious for another virus, a coronavirus, to have that happen. There are other coronaviruses that exist. Second, the other thing that I would say is that I don't know what the purpose of a planned pandemic would be. As far as the government is concerned, I don't know what their goal would be. I don't know. It doesn't make very much sense for me to establish something that has a mortality rate of 3 to 5%, depending on where you look, for population control. Because if you know it's 3 to 5%, that's not going to make many inroads as far as population control. So I don't know what the goal of that would have been. So I guess to answer your question, I don't believe that it was a government planned pandemic. If it was, it might have been by Trump, because it was not very good at just, at doing much of anything other than disrupting
That's what I said too. If it was a plan, it was the worst plan.
The horrible plan.
Like the worst plan ever. Uncontrolled pieces of it. Ebony sent a message in there, and I want to get to her point. She said, I hear the inputs everyone is regarding this vaccine, but less said than done. I think I'm scared to take it, period. I will not be getting it for my kids, not for myself. I feel we're being used as test dummies and still trying to figure out real percentages of people that have lost their lives from COVID. The government will never tell us the truth, and I still feel they're injecting people with this virus when they go to the hospital, because it's a strange how everyone that's being admitted all of a sudden dies.
Yes, ma'am. It's a lot to unpack. But what I will say to you is that I personally have seen. So if you sit back and look at it and say, well, how do you know that this is different? And I get this question a lot. How do you know that this is different? Why do you think there's a coronavirus, right? So maybe the labs are lying, maybe this, that, and other. One of the reasons that you can determine it is if you actually see the patient. So my job is infectious diseases. I've been seeing respiratory viruses for many years now. And what I have seen this year, if you did not tell me there was coronavirus, if I'd never heard of coronavirus or anything, what I would report to you today is that there is a new respiratory condition that is unique from many other respiratory conditions, has similar characteristics, but is a bit unique and seems to progress a little bit faster and seems to have a different mortality rate. So you don't have to call it coronavirus. You can call it influenza, whatever you want to call it. The reality of the situation in my view, and I see these patients, is there is something different. There is something new. And then you look at the PCR testing that was done to try to determine it, and it looks like it's coronavirus. So you can call it whatever you want to call it, but just do believe that there is something there and it's something different. So it's not something that's being made up. It's just not. And I wish that were the case, because then you would go to some rural hospitals that are completely isolated and you wouldn't have it. There are places in sub-Saharan Africa and there are places in Australia that are completely isolated and they still have coronavirus. So it's definitely a real thing. The COVID is just a name, so I wouldn't get hung up on that. It's a respiratory virus that people are dying from. And we need to get it addressed. Whether you take the vaccine or not, that's your opinion. And I support people's decision to be able to say, no, I don't want to do it. I do, but just do that from a place of information, and don't do that from a place of, hey, the government's injecting it. What is their goal? Why would they do that? If the government wanted to control you, they would put a TV in front of you. They would put McDonald's on every corner in liquor stores. That's the control they need. They don't want you dead. They want you alive and buying their shit.
So another question from Jerome. Is the vaccine only good for 2 months? What happens after that time? Will we need to be vaccinated several times throughout our lives? Is this going to be a vaccine in which we'll have to take every year, especially with mutations? What about people who've had the virus? What are some of the major side effects? I've read that the vaccine is causing side effects such as Bell's palsy. Your thoughts?
Okay. Yes. So the first question is, since it's what are we doing with this immunity? Do we have to take it again? What is the situation with that? And there's two issues. One is I'll give you two parallels. One is a pneumococcal vaccine. Pneumococcal vaccine, you only take that every 5 to 10 years, depending on your situation. So you take it now, and you're good for 5 to 10 years. Now, at 15 years after pneumococcal vaccine, you have some immunity, but it's not protective immunity. Okay, so that's why you have to take it multiple times. There are some vaccines you take just one time, like a rabies vaccine, for the most part. And then there are influenza vaccines that you have to take every single year. What's the difference? The difference is, the reason you have to take the pneumococcal vaccine over is because pneumococcus doesn't change for the most part. What happens is your immune system kind of forgets over time as we age. Okay, and that's very common with any kind of vaccine.
B-cells slacking on their job.
Right. And the second situation where you have to take it every year, influenza actually changes. So it's a completely new virus for the most part the next year. Now, this is the first year we had coronavirus. So no human being alive knows whether or not the virus is going to change or how quickly our immunity is going to wane. But we do know that our immunity will definitely wane. It's just whether that's going to be clinically significant at 2 years, 5 years, or 50 years. We'll have to wait to get that figured out. But you're taking two vaccinations in order to boost the immune system, and so you should be protected for 6 or either a year is what we currently believe. But again, it's only been here since March, probably a little earlier, but March that we're really aware of, and really studies ramped up. So we're not 100% sure, to be honest with you, but hopefully it'll be something that that'll be once in a lifetime. But if it's every year and it works and no side effects, you can sign me up.
Right,
Second part of the issue was the side effects.
We have time for a couple more questions or what? Talk to me.
Yeah, so the floor is open, so you're free to unmute yourselves and ask your question, guys.
Hey,
So
John,
can I just, Farrell, can I just address that one side effect? I don't think I got to the Bell's palsy and the side effects.
Yes, you did. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I reviewed the data. I'll try to be as quick as possible. There were a few side effects that were associated with, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you what the bad ones were. Okay. So the bad ones were, there were 3 cardiac arrests. So people that woke up and died. Okay. Now they had 1 cardiac arrest in the arm of people who got the vaccination and 2 in the arm of people who did not get the vaccination. And then what you do to determine if that's significant is you say, well, what's the total incidence of cardiac arrest in the general population? So if I take 30,000 people, how many are going to have cardiac arrest? It turns out 2 or 3. If I take, and so what it looks like happened in summary is the people in the arm that got the vaccination had less cardiac arrest than people who are in the general population. So cardiac arrest was not associated at all with this vaccination.
Did they have pre-existing conditions?
They did. They all had coronary diseases. They had things that caused them to have, would have caused them to have cardiac events, whether they got the vaccine or not. I say all that to say that 2 people in the non-vaccine, 2 people that just got placebo, and then 1 person that got the actual vaccine. So, and that rate was the same in the general population. So it was not associated with vaccine whatsoever. The Bell's palsy happened in just a couple of patients, not that many. So if you're talking about 37,000 people who got the vaccination, around 70,000 people total they looked at, the incidence of all side effects were minuscule. That doesn't mean something won't happen a year from now, but in that test period, it was very small.
Talk to me about the Tuskegee incident and how that has played into our communities. I want to get to that piece and not allow us to go without you addressing how that has promoted fear within our communities about, the testing being done on, African Americans.
Right. There's no doubt about it. So what happened in that situation, though, is you have to understand first, let me just say this. It was terrible. Things like that continue to go on. There are disparities in our community. We're undervalued, we're underappreciated, and those things are absolutely true. But what I would say to you is in this situation, the people that they did this, so in the Tuskegee speaker, the Amish, they looked at just what syphilis was going to do on a human body. Right. And they gave people syphilis, understand they were giving people syphilis and didn't give them the treatment when they had the treatment to study the natural history of syphilis. So they want to see what does syphilis do over the course of somebody's lifetime. And of course, that was terrible. And many people suffered. Some folks will tell me, well, Dr. Watts, they were compensated at some point. That's trash because some people died and there's no compensation that can give my life back. Right. Now, that being said, this is a bit of a different situation. So in Tuskegee, they were just looking at Black males and trying to determine if what syphilis does. So there was only Black males. With this specific vaccine, with the Pfizer vaccine, for example, they looked at everybody. There was no one patient population to get it. In fact, there was only 9% of the people in the Pfizer vaccine of the whole sum of participants that were African American or Black. So we were greatly underrepresented in this trial. We will also probably be unrepresented in the initial rollout, except one place.
Talk about why, though, right? Because are we volunteer? Because these are volunteer pieces, right?
Correct.
How do you then make a safe vaccine for our people if we do not volunteer to see how that works? Because they feel they're being tested on. So to me, it's a double-edged sword, right? And in a sense, it's the circular argument. How do we get past that as a people to trust what we're doing so we feel not experiment on? What provisions do we have in place? Are there consents? Do we have to sign? Is there HIPAA? What is in place now that protects us going forward?
Our task is tough. Our task is tough. So I am also in the camp of you can't beat the shit out of me and then complain when I think you're about to hit me again. You just can't do that. But I'm also in the camp of, look, I have the ability, we have the ability as a collective to be able to vet some of these processes and determine when it'll help us and when it will not help us. Because if your response to everything that's presented to you is no because it's presented to the government, then you're still allowing the government to control you. So it's a double-edged sword. It's very difficult to navigate our way through this process because we have that legitimate concerns and fear. But at the same time, if everything is bad, we stand the risk of suffering, and that's what we're doing here. Okay, so 9% of the people that participated were Black. Now, one of the reasons why that is the case is because we just talked about, because of the concern, even in this area. So one of the teams took it to one of the most one of the nicest African American areas south of Atlanta, and they could not get participants. They took it to one of the tougher places in Atlanta, could not get participants. So it's not a finance thing, it's a Black people thing. And so we understand that. And so we also have to understand what it's doing to our community. We only represent about 12% of the population, but we're 17 to 18% of the COVID deaths.
Now that is really important for people to get. I don't know if that part can be driven home now.
We'll try to drive it home a little bit more if we can, Brother Farrell. The other way that you can look at this is you can look at this from what they call age-adjusted mortality. Or in other words, we don't live as long as whites and Asians. Okay, so our statistics are bundled up in the age that we live. Okay, so if you expand that out and you age adjust all of the factors with regard to COVID, our mortality rate per 100,000 is 118 compared to theirs at 3. Okay, so think about those numbers. 118 for every 100,000 are going to die, not get COVID, not get in the hospital, are going to die, as compared to 33. Now, you might say, well, how do you trust those statistics? Because I know some of the people that get those statistics together, and they're consistent no matter where you are. And I'm actually in the hospital that see those individuals there. So I can confirm that there is a disparity with regard to both the deaths and the number of people that contract the virus. So if you have a problem that's disproportionately affecting you, then you have to do your due diligence. But what you can't do is just say no because of the past that you've had. You can't just say no. You could, but it might be a problem for you. What I would advocate for is do the research, talk to people that know this, and then make a determination for which one of those things is good, which one of them not. We certainly take the cholesterol medicine. We certainly go to the store when we have a cold and take some of the nasal congestion medicine. When we get something that, forgive me, brothers, when we burn a little bit or whatever, we don't have a problem taking some penicillin. And so,
he said when we burn it a little bit.
A little bit. All those things came through the same pipe.
We'll take Percocet, we'll take Xanax, we'll smoke weed, we'll drink, we'll take Molly, we'll take all these other things in our environment, but we won't take a vaccine. All the other synthetic shit that
with Molly.
I was about to say that, Pharaoh. You got to take that weed out of there.
Come on, bro. You just put weed with Percocets? Come on, bro.
I'm with Brother Basquiat on that. I can't do the weed with
that in there, but I'm just saying that but we do all these other things, right? Some of the same tablets, some of the same over-the-counter medications that you go into the store for are made from the same manufacturers, right? You'll take a pill, you'll take an oral dose, but you won't take an injection. We'll do all those other things put in our body as a community. It's well known, fentanyl, heroin, all these other things that are plaguing our communities, but we won't take a fucking vaccine to save our life. Help me understand that logic.
Right. No, I get it. I get it. I understand the skepticism from us, because I have some of it myself. What I think, again, is I think we have to be able to vet it, and we don't go blindly into anything. And if we don't go blindly in and we get our facts and we understand other people have taken it, and remember, this technology has been given to people since 2017, even before that. So the technology is relatively sound. The data was done sound. There is no way that somebody's going to be able to tell you 100% that you're going to be fine a year from now. But what I can tell you is, with about a 90% degree certainty, is you're much less likely to get COVID-19 after this vaccine as compared to before. And so to some people, that's enough. And to some people, it's not. But whatever you do, if you can please just consider making the decision based on science and not based on emotion. But you have to remember the emotion for sure.
Somebody asked one more question here. when are things going to get back to normal? I think that's what a lot of people are trying to figure out, you know.
Right. Yeah. So
I want y'all to take the vaccine and stop playing.
So the vaccine is definitely a part of it. You know, social isolation. If everybody was California, we'd be good now, right? So California did what they were supposed to do. They shut things down. They started mask advising. It's just that, you know, there is political and there is economic pressure to stop doing that. When California and other states backed off of that, they had an outbreak.
Not only political, are you kidding me? Let's address the elephant in the room. The millennials were having coronavirus parties. We're going out wearing non-masking. So I'm just trying to call it what it is.
Oh, wow.
We were. Okay.
Let's stop blaming everything on the millennials, right? Like, because we have some politicians, exes, boomers, who are also out getting their hair done.
It was mad senior citizens too out here at the Trader Joe's and allowing me at the Barnes, and I got to tell old girl to back up because she don't want to wear her mask, but she want to have a conversation.
Right.
Yeah. It's multi-generational. It is. It's more aligned with political views and finance.
I don't care. You can call it what you. They're 70% of the population, aren't they? Somewhere 60. Don't they make up that? You guys got to get it together. We need 70% people. I think, doctor, please correct me, to get out of 330 million people. That's like 240. People need to get the vaccine. So we need to do a lot more convincing in our neighborhoods, and let's address the real issues. That's why I don't want to beat around the bush. We got about 5 minutes, but ask anything, guys. What is plaguing our community that we don't understand, that we don't want to do this? And I want to be able to address that.
It's massive distrust. It's distrust. It's generational distrust.
Yeah.
That people aren't feeling it. And up till now, I mean, the reality is that the distrust goes so deep and so far. And we want to talk about politics and things like that. For me, it's like this whole blame of people want to put the blame on somebody. You always want to put the blame on somebody. And like, unless you want to put all of it on all of them, you know what I'm saying? Because it's not just one person who's a part of it. It wasn't Donald Trump's fault for this vaccine. Donald Trump is a businessman, so anything that messes up his money is messing up his business. So of course he don't want no a pandemic in the world that messes up his money, right? But like, we want to blame somebody for it. We want to put it on somebody else. People weren't in good health to begin with. People weren't doing something very important that you talked about at the very start of the show, Farrell, which was using good hygiene, staying home when you're sick, and washing your hands. I mean, this is very basic, but this is like on some evolution. Like, if you don't want to do these things, you know what I mean? I don't get a flu shot every year, but I stay home when I don't feel well. When I see somebody who's sick, I stay away from them, and I wash my hands and I get good hygiene, right?
Master teacher, we're not in the middle of pandemic all the time. Like, now is a different story, right? I mean,
I agree with that part. But see, the black community has always been under pandemic. So there's not this. That's the part that for us, for black people, is like, welcome to our world. Like, there's always been a pandemic in the black neighborhood with diabetes, with high blood pressure, with all of these, you know, I mean, with respiratory problems, right? So, and nobody's ever rung the bell. Nobody's ever been trying to save us from it. So why now? Why? That's why
we should save ourselves, right? We should stop looking for superheroes, right? At some point in time, let's take responsibility and own our own shit, right? And when we're at that space, let's have that honest conversation with each other. What I don't think we do as a community, we don't talk to each other honestly about that other shit. We'll talk outside of that, but we're not having those one-on-ones with us about health, about better hygiene, about better, eating habits, about exercise, about those things that are plaguing our community disproportionately more so than any other community. But we're ready to talk shit about anything else outside of that. I just want us to have more self-ownership first. This is not to discount systemic racism or other things that are out that I absolutely exist.
Very good point.
Let's not compound that issue by not taking care of ourselves.
I'm with you on this point because, see, the other issue that I have is that, see, the white man can't solve any of our problems that the black community has. I want to be clear about that. But the beauty of that is that we can solve all of our own problems. It's just a matter of personal choice, right? And we've come so far as a race from just the slave enslavement, right? we could change our entire situation in just one generation. We're that cold of a community. We could do it if we all decide to make personal decisions, though. But it's a personal decision that you have to make, and you're not going to see the outcome of it right now. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But
Sacrifice.
you'll see a tremendous change. You know what I'm saying? If we all decide to make that personal decision.
Well said, man. So one of Stay Woke's new challenges in the new year, I'm going to have a family challenge, Black family challenge, where we every day of the week, maybe for 2 weeks, and we monitor for a whole year. We do activities, we eat better, we exercise, we read, we learn about, we do financial stuff. I think there has to be some revolution that takes place that we catch on to, but we're not. So right now, I think we're in the middle of a pandemic. Scribe, we have any more time left, or we're done?
No, I just want to hear the Doc's closing words, and
Okay. So Doc, can you take us out, man? Give us some final words. Any thoughts that we didn't get to today? Anything you want to share with the general public? Any general information? I want to thank you guys so much, and everyone else. But yes.
Yeah. So I'll try to be as quick as possible. Absolutely. I'm a big believer in everything that was most of the stuff that was just discussed. A part of the disparities is associated with, our diet, our exercise, all those things. You can have a healthy life and you can fight most infections with your own body, plant-based, whole foods, organic if possible, but definitely plant-based. Whole foods are super important, and we would need less of medical treatment if we did that in regular engagement in exercising, meditation. All those things are super important. With that, you don't even really need as much of a doctor, but you should still engage and make good decisions on your health care with not just this vaccine, but the preventive measures, but certainly with this vaccine, whether you take it or not, make a decision based on something that's real and something you can verify, and spend your time. If you're spending enough time, doing whatever, spend an hour trying to figure this stuff out so that you can make an informed decision. And I appreciate the time and coming on here and chatting with you. I appreciate you, Brother Farrell, and everybody who's on the panel. Thank you so much.
Let's give Dr. Chris
Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Doc.
Let me get a round, too.
Let's also give ourselves a round of applause for being able to engage in very spicy dialogue. Let's give the panel an amazing dialogue. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
Everything. Let's have an amazing year. Let's take great care. Let's, as I always say in my mantra, let's educate and then vaccinate. Let's educate and then vaccinate. And as I always say in closing, and anyone else have any final words for the year, Pandemic 21? Anyone want to say any final last closing words? Any last thoughts? If not, in our closing,
I want to plug Stay Woke though, because you have that amazing gear behind you. So if anyone is interested in the gear, from a mask, cap, T-shirt, go to Instagram. We've got Stay Woke merch is the name of the page. You can also find it on Etsy. Get it.
Thank you guys so much for an amazing year. Thank you guys for following us. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how important it is for me. It's more so than my viewership. It's more so is to share pertinent information that we can actually make a change on. So not all the information is really hyped or lit, but it's definitely informative and it's definitely transformative. So I wanted to thank you guys so much for joining our podcast. And all we always say when we end, you guys ready?
Yep.
Woke to the past. Right? Woke to the current. Stay woke for your future. Help me. Help you. Unfuck America. Let's go.
Thank
you so much, everyone. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Medical experts say African Americans suffer from COVID-19 differently than other races. That's why a group of African American doctors is encouraging the Black community to take a COVID-19 vaccine once it's proven safe. News4Jax reporter Marilyn Parker joining us from the newsroom with this doctor's message. Marilyn.
So consider how COVID-19 has impacted the Black community. Well, the Department of Health says Black Americans make up 29% of the county's cases and that they make up 29.8% of all Duval County. I spoke with a doctor who says this is a life or death decision for this community. How safe will a COVID-19 vaccine be for the Black community?
And our Black lives must be a core value.
8 prominent African American doctors put together an initiative to encourage Black people to take the vaccine when it's safe and effective. In the letter, they say for this to be successful, the developers must do more to earn your trust now and in the future. Dr. Carol Jenkins Neal agrees.
Everything needs to be evidence-based.
She's the president of the First Coast Black Nurses Association, a group whose national president also signed the letter.
Do you think that people in the Black community should wait until we know it's safe and effective, or take it as soon as they distribute it?
I want to err on being safe and effective. A lot of people in the African American community, they have that perception, are they really telling me the truth?
She says historically, from cases like Henrietta Lacks's cells being taken or experiments with the Tuskegee syphilis study, African Americans are hesitant on vaccines.
They still remember that. They feel like when they go in the hospital, am I really going to be treated fairly?
Dr. Neal says she questions the diversity in people participating in clinical trials, so I went over to Pfizer's website. They say 30% of U.S. participants have diverse backgrounds, and of that 30%, 10% were Black.
We need proof.
She says Black communities across the country and in Duval must consider access to medicine, access to transportation for multiple doses of the vaccine, and how it responds differently for people with underlying conditions. Dr. Neal says she's been speaking with African Americans in Duval about taking the vaccine. She says many aren't convinced and are discouraged because it's been politicized, but she encourages people to get educated on the vaccines and their effectiveness.